Chapter 1, Ruth. Before we get started, it's always really important to understand your context. So we need to learn about where we're talking about and different things before we even start reading Ruth. So a little bit of information. Ruth is the one of two books in the Bible that is named for a woman. So there's only two books in the Bible named for a woman. One is Ruth, one is Esther. Now, Ruth is the only non-Jewish woman between her and Esther. So she's the only non-Jewish woman that has a book of the Bible named after her. So that's pretty interesting. And this book takes place in the time of Judges. So during that time, Israel was not ruled by kings. They were more governed by judges that God would raise up. So this was a very oppressive and heavy time for Israel. So they were full of disobedience during this time, and they were worshiping idols. And I think maybe 7 or 8 times, maybe more, in the book of Judges, it says they did evil in the sight of the Lord. So this was a time of great disobedience and just a heaviness for Israel. So Ruth takes place during that time, and she comes from Moab. So she's a Moabite or Moabitess. Now, the Moabites come from the son of Lot. And we can read that in Genesis 19, verses 30 through 38. Now, last night we read all of that, but for time's sake, I'll just kind of sum it up. So, after Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed, Lot's 2 daughters think that there is no one left on earth. So essentially they want their family to live on. So they get their father drunk and sleep with him, and both of his daughters conceive a child with Lot. So the Israelites already have a problem with Moab, coming from an incestuous relationship. And the Israelites were also treated with hostility by the Moabites when they came out of Egypt. And you can read about that in Numbers chapters 22 through 24. That gives you like a summary of how the Israelites were treated by the Moabites. And the Moabites were seduced by the Israelites physically and spiritually. And we're going to read that in Numbers 25, verses 1 through 3. And Israel abode in Shittim, and the people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab. And they called the people unto the sacrifices of their gods, and the people did eat and bowed down to their gods. And Israel joined himself unto Baal Peor, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against them. So there's a few reasons why Moab and the Israelites, they didn't mesh well together. And if we go to Deuteronomy 23, verses 3 through 6, it says, An Ammonite or Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord forever, because they met you not with bread and with water in the way, when ye came forth out of Egypt, and because they hired against thee Balaam the son of Beor, of Pethor, of Mesopotamia, sorry if I'm getting those words wrong, to curse thee. Nevertheless, the Lord thy God would not hearken unto Balaam, but the Lord thy God turned the curse into a blessing unto thee, because the Lord thy God loved thee. Thou shalt not seek their peace nor their prosperity all thy days forever. So it's saying, do not seek peace or prosperity from an Ammonite or Moabite. So that is God's commandment to Israel. So that is important to remember, that Ruth comes from Moab, and that they have those commandments about Moab. The Israelites have those commandments about Moab. So we're going to go right over to Ruth chapter 1. And I'm going to read the entire chapter. If you don't want to listen to that, you might want to skip ahead a little bit. But after I read that chapter, then we are going to go back verse by verse and discuss some things. And this is how we did this last night in the women's Bible study. And that's probably how we're going to keep doing that. It seems to work well to just really go line by line and study out everything. And so you'll get to see kind of how we're doing the meetings. And I'd love for everyone who's watching this to join us if you can. But if not, videos and notes. Okay, so Ruth chapter 1. Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land. And a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. And the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the country of Moab and continued there. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her 2 sons. And they took them wives of the women of Moab. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth, and they dwelled there about 10 years. And Mahlon and Chilion died also, both of them, and the woman was left of her 2 sons and her husband. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law, that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. Wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return unto the land of Judah. And Naomi said unto her 2 daughters-in-law, Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as ye have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant you that ye may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. And they said unto her, Surely we will return with thee unto thy people. And Naomi said, Turn again, my daughters. Why will ye go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have an husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have an husband also tonight, and should also bear sons, would ye tarry for them till they were grown? Would ye stay for them from having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. And they lifted up their voice and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her. And she said, Behold, thy sister-in-law is gone back unto her people and unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law. And Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee, for whither thou goest I will go, and where thou lodgest I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. When she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking unto her. So they 2 went until they came to Bethlehem. And it came to pass, when they were come to Bethlehem, that all the city was moved about them, and they said, Is this Naomi? And she said unto them, Call me not Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. Why then call ye me Naomi, seeing the Lord hath testified against me, and the Almighty hath afflicted me? So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, which returned out of the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of barley harvest. Okay, so that was Ruth chapter 1, and we are going to go back to the very beginning, the first verse. Now, it says that there was a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah. So Bethlehem means house of bread, and which is ironic because in the first verse it says there was a famine in the land. Now, if we read Deuteronomy 11, verses 13 through 17, it says, And it shall come to pass, if ye shall hearken diligently unto my commandments, which I command you this day, to love the Lord your God, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, that I will give you the rain of your land in his due season, the first rain and the latter rain, that thou mayest gather in thy corn, and thy wine, and thine oil. And I will send grass in thy fields for thy cattle, that thou mayest eat and be full. Take heed to yourselves, that your heart be not deceived, and ye turn aside and serve other gods, and worship them. And then the Lord's wrath be kindled against you, and he shut up the heaven, that there be no rain, and that the land yield not her fruit, unless ye perish quickly from off the good land which the Lord giveth you. So we can assume, going by the verses in Judges, how they did evil in the sight of the Lord, and that the Lord is warning them that if they disobeyed, the land would not yield fruit, that the Israelites were being disobedient at this time, that there was a famine in the land. Since there was a famine in the land at that time, the Israelites were disobeying God, and this was a time of their punishment, pretty much. Okay. So, if you look up the word sojourn, so it says they went to sojourn in the country of Moab. That means a temporary stay. So, we end up learning, though, that it wasn't temporary for Elimelech and his 2 sons. So, what was supposed to be a temporary stay, they died in a foreign land. Okay, verse 2 says, "And the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the country of Moab and continued there." So, to journey into Moab from where they were, they had to go through the Jericho Pass, the wilderness near the Dead Sea, across the Jordan River into Moab. So they were departing the promised land, returning to the wilderness in the direction of a pagan land. So they were very much so going in the wrong direction. Now, Elimelech also means God is king. So I'm sure his mother named him, to give him that remembrance that God is king. But I don't think he was really acting as if God was king. He was supposed to trust in the Lord to provide for him, but he went specifically where it says that he should not go, because remember in Deuteronomy 23 verses 3 through 6, it says, "Thou shalt not seek their peace nor their prosperity all thy days forever." So they were going into a pagan land that they were not supposed to go into. And in verse 3, it says, "Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her 2 sons." So we don't know why he died, but, he chose to do that, to take his family there, and he dies, leaving them behind. Verse 4 says, "And they took them wives of the women of Moab. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth, and they dwelled there about 10 years. So the Israelites were forbidden to marry those from pagan countries. And since Elimelech took his family there, his 2 sons ended up marrying 2 women from Moab. And Mahlon and Chilion died also, both of them, and the woman was left of her 2 sons and her husband." So Naomi is left behind. Her husband and both of her sons died. Now, in this culture, that's pretty much as low as you can get as far as being at a disadvantage, because Naomi had no men to care for her. She had no husband, no sons. She was essentially on her own. Now, verse 6 says, "Then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread." So she reminds me here of the prodigal son. The prodigal son went off into a faraway land, to a faraway country, and eventually he arises and goes back to his father. And it says she arose, and because she had heard that the country of Moab the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. So we can probably assume that at this time, when the famine is over, that Israel had started being obedient to the Lord again and were being blessed. So she had heard that the Lord had visited them and giving them bread in Bethlehem, it means the house of bread, and she wants to return home. Verse 7 says, "Wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return unto the land of Judah." So she arose and she went forth, which is what we all need to do. We cannot, she could have chosen to stay there in a pagan, faraway land and just wallow in her misery. But it says she arose and she went forth, which is what we all need to do in, our situations, that it'd be easier to kind of sit around and wallow in it sometimes. But we have to rise and go forth. We have to take action. And it says that her 2 daughters-in-law with her. So verse 8 says, "And Naomi said unto her 2 daughters-in-law, Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as ye have dealt with the dead and with me." So we can kind of get a sense that her daughters-in-law maybe were good people, because she puts a blessing on them and says, "The Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me." Now, if I was Naomi, I think that I would try to persuade them to come with me, because she knows who the true God is, and that if she's going back to a land that serves the true God, I would think that she would want to take them with her. But she was probably also just grieving, and, maybe she thought that they didn't want to come with her. It says in verse 9, "The Lord grant you that ye may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. So Naomi wants them to move on and find another husband. And it says that they lifted up their voice and wept. So, they're all grieving her daughters-in-law they've each lost a husband. They've also lost their father-in-law, and now they're getting ready to lose Naomi. And even though Naomi is still alive, they have this possibility in front of them that they are going to, they're going to be grieving for Naomi as well, even though she's alive. We can grieve for people who are very much alive. And at this day and time, it wasn't like they could, get on a video call and talk every day. This was going to be a forever separation. So it says in verse 10, and they said unto her, surely we will return with thee unto thy people. So both Orpah and Ruth tell Naomi that they want to go with her. And, we read that only Ruth goes with her. So, speaking of us as Christians, I'm sure we all know of people who have said, yes, Lord, I will follow you. And it's not much time later that they have kind of went back on their decision to follow the Lord. So they both at this point say, we will return with thee unto thy people. Verse 11 says, and Naomi said, turn again, my daughters. Why will ye go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? We're going to read 11 through 13 together and discuss. Turn again, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have an husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have an husband also tonight, and should also bear sons, would ye tarry for them till they were grown? Would ye stay for them from having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. What does Naomi mean whenever she is saying, I'm too old to have a husband, I cannot bear any more sons, would you wait for them until they are grown? So that was the culture at the time. So if we read in Deuteronomy 25:5, it says, if brethren dwell together, and one of them die, and have no child, the wife of the dead shall not marry without unto a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go in unto her, and take her to him to wife, and perform the duty of an husband's brother unto her. And it shall be that the firstborn which she beareth shall succeed in the name of his brother which is dead, that his name be not put out of Israel. So she's saying, I don't have another husband to give you. She only has herself. Verse 14 says, and they lifted up their voice and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her. So Orpah has decided to go back to her people, and her name is never mentioned again. But it says, Ruth clave unto her. Cleave means to adhere strongly to, or become very strongly involved, emotionally attached. So, cleave is used in Genesis when talking of marriage. And in Joshua 23:8, it says, cleave unto the Lord your God. So, every word that is in the Bible is important. And when it says Ruth clave unto her, it was a very strong emotion. It wasn't just that she liked Naomi. It wasn't just that she loved Naomi. She clave unto her. She cleaved unto her. It was just a really strong attachment to Naomi. Verse 15 says, and she said, behold, thy sister-in-law is gone back unto her people and unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law. So if we think about that, it's saying, go back to your people and your gods. And Naomi knows that they're false gods, that Israel is worshiping the true God. So when she says, go to your people and your gods, I just feel so strongly that Naomi should have kind of begged them to come with her, because she knows they're going back to false gods. Now, if we read in Joshua 24:15, it says, and if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom ye will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served, that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land ye dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And Orpah had a choice to make, as we all do. She chose something familiar, where Ruth chose to follow Naomi into an unfamiliar land. So let's read Ruth's speech to Naomi. And Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee, for whither thou goest I will go, and where thou lodgest I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. So this is a speech that shows devotion to Naomi. It is very widely known. It's said at weddings and between people who love one another, and it just shows just that really true love and devotion. She says, where thou diest will I die, and there will I be buried. She doesn't even want her body to go back to where she came from. And she says, thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. So Naomi was a worshiper of the true God, and we are meant to be a light to others. And I just have to assume that Naomi spoke of her God and what he had done, and Ruth and Orpah both heard these things. But Ruth saw something in Naomi, maybe the way that she told the stories about God, or maybe the way that Naomi just who she was, and Ruth thought it was worth following after. That's just what I'm thinking about it. Verse 18 says, when she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking unto her. So she knew Ruth was going to go with her, so she didn't try to convince her to leave anymore. Verse 19, so they two went until they came to Bethlehem. And it came to pass, when they were come to Bethlehem, that all the city was moved about them. And they said, is this Naomi? Now Naomi has not been there in a decade. When she left, she had a husband and 2 sons, and now she's coming back 10 years later with no husband, no sons, and now she has a woman from Moab with her. And I'm sure that Naomi has aged from the grief, and that she's just doesn't look like her old self. And they're saying, is this Naomi? And she said unto them, call me not Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. Naomi means sweet or pleasant, and Mara means bitter. Now, if we go to Exodus 15 and 23, we see that word Mara again. They could not drink of the waters of Mara, for they were bitter. Therefore, the name of it was called Mara. And we have to remember, I forgot to mention this, that it says they two went together. Now, this wasn't a small journey. This wasn't a little 2-hour trip. This was probably 50 miles, around 50 miles that they traveled, and 2 women alone. It was very dangerous. It wasn't like Ruth could say, well, I'll go tonight and see how it goes, and maybe I can go back to Moab. This was, it was a choice. They probably walked on foot most of the time. So let's go to verse 21. I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. Why then call ye me Naomi, seeing the Lord hath testified against me, and the Almighty hath afflicted me? So Naomi wasn't sugarcoating anything. She said, I went out full, I'm coming back empty. The Lord has been against me, and he has dealt very bitterly with me. So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, which returned out of the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of barley harvest. So they did not come at the end of barley harvest, which is very important. So barley harvest begins around March or April, and it begins on the 2nd day of the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, so the beginning of Passover. So when Naomi left, there was a famine, and now she is coming back getting ready for the harvest. So they will be there from the beginning of the harvest to the end of the harvest, which is really important to how God provides for them later on. So this is Ruth chapter 1.